So oftentimes, Elizabeth Warren gets credit for creating the CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that was created because of the 2008 market crash. Um, Now, you all should already probably by now know how I feel about Elizabeth Warren. I feel like Elizabeth Warren is pretty much the Paul Bunyan of the Senate. Her progressivism is basically entrenched in tall tales with no actual factual basis and no legislation to put to her name to convince me that she's actually progressive. And I also think now the most popular myth is that she's quote unquote progressive on finance. And just before we get into the CFPB stuff, she had a committee that was actually dedicated to holding banks accountable, holding the people who were responsible for that market crash accountable, and she did nothing. And doing nothing seems to be a consistent pattern. So what we're going to do today is actually go talk about the CFPB and one of the problems with it that really never gets brought up. And although it did get brought up to Elizabeth Warren, she actually refused to do something about it. So, Sophia, can you go ahead and let us know about this CFPB debacle?
All right, so this was written in 2014, and it's in an article in the American Banker. So I'm not gonna read the entire article, but I'm just gonna go through some of the most important parts. So, since the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau burst onto the financial stage a few years ago, it has made a steady stream of controversial moves. None are more despised by bankers than the agency's use of statistical differences in the loan terms offered to different ethnic groups to sue creditors for unintentional racial bias. In an ironic twist, it turns out that the CFPB's own managers have shown distinctly different patterns in how they rate employees of different races according to the confidential agency data obtained by American Banker. Specifically, CFPB managers show a pattern of ranking white employees distinctly better than minorities in performance reviews used to grant raises and issue bonuses. However, whites were twice as likely in 2013 to receive the agency's top grade than were African American or Hispanic employees, the data shows. So the article goes on to kind of talk about how this is obviously favoring Caucasian men and it's creating a hostile work environment. So they received plenty of complaints from a bunch of the staffers, and they actually filed 115 official grievances to the National Treasury Employees Union.
Wow.
And that was since this article was written in March of 2014, and that was just since the August before. So it was a very short time frame.
So it was 115 grievances in less than a year.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a lot. Yeah. So there are others that haven't even reached reached the officials, and that would be around 200 then, counting the people who haven't received their complaints. So most of the allegations pertain to unequal pay and raise questions about the recent performance reviews, and it negatively impacts non-whites and females to some degree. So then the CFPB spokesman, Sam Guilford, said, just as we often remind lenders that strong compliance management systems are critical to ensure compliance with consumer protection laws, the Bureau has taken a compliance management approach in monitoring and evaluating its own performance ratings. And then in 2013, it had 1,010 staffers rating, and they rate it from 1 to 5. So they found that the discrepancies were even greater at the ratings range extremes. At the top, 1/5 of white employees, or 20.7%, received a 5 and were dubbed role models compared to 10.5% of African Americans, or 9.1% of Hispanics. So,
do you know what the breakdown of the demographics in the corporation are in general? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, actually, yeah. So it actually goes on to explain this in a little bit, because one of the highlights of the CFPB is that it has a lot of diversity compared to other agencies. So that it goes on to explain that towards the end. But here it's saying the statistics themselves do not prove that the CFPB managers are discriminating intentionally against minorities employees, yet they do indicate that racial disparities can be just as easily identified within the CFPB's ranks among the lenders that the Bureau regulates. So it's kind of pointing out the hypocrisy there. And another agency employee said, if we're telling banks to own it, the statistical evidence of racial bias, then why don't we do the same things too? And that was the major complaint of the employees. So it says here, this goes on to explain the diversity within the agency. So it says the performance review figures are all the more surprising given the way the CFPB has touted having more women and minorities within its rank than other federal agencies do. Approximately 47% of CFPB staffers are women, and 34% identify themselves as minorities, according to an agency report sent to Congress last year. That makes it even more diverse than other federal regulators, where women represent 44% and minorities 29% of staff, according to the report.
So it seems like basically it's the diverse representation is merely surface level. It isn't like a substantive diversity, because and by the way, this information I was given to by a former employee of the CFPB. And that former employee also, who is Southeast Asian, she's Indian, she's of Indian descent, and she was one of the ones affected by this. This was actually a breakout story, and basically in 2014 it was a breakout story. It is actually, there was an attempt to have it covered again recently, because basically Warren has been getting all this credit for creating the CFPB and being called progressive, but she informed me that, and this is somebody who's an attorney, right? She was on the legal side for the CFPB. And every time these complaints would be talked about, they would be ignored. Now, here's where it gets, oh, by the way, Elizabeth Warren, her office was contacted because the CFPB was actually created before she was elected. So I don't know why people always conflate the two. She was not a senator when she created this. They went to Elizabeth Warren's office and she didn't do anything about it. She was completely silent on it. And to my knowledge and my understanding, nothing has changed. And what makes it even worse is who was in charge of the CFPB while all this was going down. Sophia, do you have that information?
Yeah, so he ran for Ohio governor in 2018. And his name was, I believe it was Richard Cordray.
I think it was Corday.
Yeah, it was Cordray. I know his last name was Cordray. But basically, Obama had nominated him after a lot of people were convinced that Elizabeth Warren wouldn't be able to overcome Republican opposition. Mm-hmm. And she was known as a darling of liberals. And she actually originally proposed the idea of creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in 2007. Now, and she was appointed as advisor.
Yeah, so she was basically a consultant for it. But now that name might sound familiar to a lot of you, because the person who was in charge of the CFPB, literally while all this racist nonsense was going on, this is 2014, mind you, that's when this particular article was put out. Elizabeth Warren being made aware of it, Boston Globe reporting on it, obviously one of the biggest publications in Massachusetts where Elizabeth Warren serves, talks about this. And yet, in the Ohio governor's race, who does Elizabeth Warren endorse over Dennis Kucinich? Boudreaux. So once again, we are faced with the reality that Elizabeth Warren will do what's best for her career. She will do what's best for her personal network. It is not about the people. It is not about her constituents. It is about her future, not ours. And if she, because I mean, Dennis Kucinich was clearly the better candidate in that race. But even after she kind of had her CFPB kind of taken from her, right? It was basically, she was being propped up to, hey, you create this, you'll be in charge of it. Cool. Well, Republicans don't like you that much. Don't know what that has to do with literally anything that's going on right now, especially in 2012, 2011. So, but that's what the excuse was. I don't think that was really the reason why. I don't think they thought Elizabeth Warren could have handled it, to be honest with you. Because, I mean, they just put another Democrat in there. But she didn't care that the guy who took her position was running for governor. Because she ended up endorsing him anyway. Why? Well, because he was in charge of my baby. And how does it look if I don't endorse the person that was in charge of my baby?
Yeah,
I
and
don't
she
know.
specifically, when she went on to endorse him, she specifically described his work for Ohio families after the 2008 recession, particularly with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency Warren helped develop. This is taken from an article in the LA Times. And then it says that Warren said Cordray's work on developing fair student loan practices while leading the CFPB illustrated his commitment to helping young people. And after she stepped down,
She
after she
basically
was
used it to boost
nominated,
herself.
she went back to teaching at Harvard, which is interesting too.
Yeah, so basically she used the endorsement to boost the CFPB because remember the endorsement came in 2018. And so obviously, I don't think anybody should be questioning this by now. She was planning on running for president. If that endorsement happened, right? Think about it. What state do you need to win the general election? Ohio. So if the governor of Ohio is in your back pocket, you have a better chance to win the general election against Donald Trump in a state that could go either way. And Dennis Kucinich was not going to endorse Elizabeth Warren, to be completely honest with you. And also, let's be honest, the election was rigged against Dennis Kucinich. A lot of people believe. Ohio is known for election rigging, and she probably knew that the fix was in from the beginning. And if she knew that the fix was in from the beginning, just like she knew with Hillary Clinton, because the right thing to do in 2016 would have been to endorse who? Bernie. But she knew the fix was in, so she waited and then endorsed Hillary last minute. Same thing in Ohio. Everybody in Ohio knew the fix was in, and it was against Dennis Kucinich, so she endorsed the person who she thought would give her an endorsement in the general election. So the moral of the story is, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Elizabeth Warren's own organization didn't like they're supposed to, one of their jobs is to call out racial biases within lending and financial institutions and things like that. It's also, supposed to check itself. You're gonna call yourself the most diverse organization, and you were clearly not. Like I said, it got pretty heated. A lot of people left the organization because of this,
That was a big problem. It was kind of ruining its reputation because a
and
lot
she
of
didn't
people were leaving.
and she didn't speak up about it. She didn't say it should do better. There was nothing. Why? Because the media didn't cover it, and the liberal media, especially because they were propping up Elizabeth Warren over the last 3 years, will absolutely not cover it. And she should be. Remember all the heat Nina Turner came under because of our revolution. Bernie Sanders came under scrutiny from people who were involved in his campaign, and he had nothing to do with, but just because it was his baby, so to speak, he gets blamed for it. And that's just kind of how politics goes, and that's it's you got to take the good with the bad. If you're going to get all the credit for something, then you have to be held accountable. And Elizabeth Warren, once again, just is never really held accountable. And so it just is, once again, it exemplifies just how much she just gets a pass after pass after pass, no matter what the situation is. And things like this seem to always fall by the wayside. So appreciate you covering that, Sophia.
Hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to get all of our notifications if you like that episode of Mikasa Sukasa. You can also help continue to grow our show by donating to our Patreon and helping us hit our goal of 500 patrons. But remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.